So now we are moving on swiftly to one of the key aspects of, are we going to travel or not? So here I'd like to hand over to Jon Howell from Bench Events and also the founder of Aviadev, discussing air travel and its opportunities across the continent. Jon, without any waste of time, over to you, and I'll allow you to introduce your panel and take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tess. Thank you. I'm just going to, I'm also doing the videos here. So I'm just going to ask all my panelists to start their videos. And I will do a quick introduction. So there we go. So I'm managing that as well. So thank you so much to Tess and the site team for putting me at the helm of this vital session today. I'm really excited about the panel that we've got because it's very diverse and there's so much to talk about. A lot of it does overlap with the things that we've talked about this morning. The first thing to say to everybody who's there as an attendee is please do interact with us. Do use the chat function, use the Q&A function. We will be looking at those. I'll be looking at those throughout the session. So please do pose your questions to the panelists. So for those of you who don't know me, I am the founder and CEO of Aviadev Africa. We're the largest event dedicated to developing air connectivity to, from, but most importantly, within the African continent. We wanted to create something that was truly African centric. And this is where I see the opportunity and what I want to explore today. And it follows on from the themes that we've discussed this morning. One thing we're definitely seeing as the pandemic takes hold is the importance of air transport and the importance of connecting people. It's a means of driving economic activity. It's a means of connecting people, cultures, and business. And one thing I would like to say, just to follow up on Kwache's session, is a lot of the success we're seeing from virtual conferences and virtual chats is as the basis, is based on the fact that we've had physical interaction before. We've met each other at conferences, so we already have a relationship. Where I think there's a challenge is if you don't already have that relationship, then it's very hard to strike a brand new relationship using these virtual platforms. So I'm a big believer as a conference organizer, we need to go back to that. I can see this hybrid side of it. And of course, aviation will play its part, but I just wanted to say that. And I also wanted to say, just to reiterate what was said this morning, that there are kind of three stages. A lot of people are talking about pre-COVID and post-COVID. I actually think you've got three. You've got pre-COVID with COVID, because it's around for a while, and then you've got post-COVID, and we're in that middle stage at the moment. So it's how do we manage with the circumstances that we've got, and that's what we're going to explore in this panel today. So the main themes that we're going to explore are how to inspire traveller confidence. You can put all the capacity in the market as you want, but if people are not willing to book a ticket and don't have that confidence to travel, they won't travel. Is now the right time to open up the African market from an aviation perspective, from a visa perspective? We've had some great strides, but there's still barriers, so we want to explore that. How is the approach to attracting airline and air service? How is that going to change as a result of the pandemic? And how are the airlines going to view this differently? The destinations and the tourist boards and the airports, of course. And ultimately, the big question, when is traffic going to recover to the levels that we saw last year? We had some very, very bullish expectations in terms of the growth of air transport globally, especially in Africa, was going to be the fastest growing region in terms of percentage growth. And of course, this has put a stop to a lot of that. So what I want to do is get on with introducing my panel. They will obviously add a little bit of color to the brief description that I'm going to give now. I'd like to start with Zux. So Zux Ramasia is the CEO of Basa, which is the Board of Airline Representatives of South Africa. Many of you will know Zux's name, and she was with SAA for nearly 30 years, and has just left there, where she served finally as the CEO, as the acting CEO. So she's got huge experience in all parts of that business. So we're delighted to have you with us. Thanks for joining us, Zux. Aaron Munyetsi. He's got huge experience as an airline executive, working with SAA at home and abroad as a regional general manager. And Aaron's just finished working with the African Airlines Association, where he served as Director, Government, Legal and Industry Affairs as well. He's also a great public speaker and a great coach as well, and somebody I've known for a long time, although I was struggling to recognize you there, Aaron, with the new facial hair, which the lockdown facial hair I'm quite enjoying. Paul as well. Paul Vandenbrink is the Senior Project Manager for Air Access at Wesgro in the Western Cape. Paul now lives down there in the Western Cape, but it comes from Holland originally, gained a lot of experience working for the world-class Schiphol group in Amsterdam and brought a lot of those learnings to the African market and has shared those with us. And we actually had the Aviadev event the last 2 years was held actually at Century City. So thank you to Gary as well for a fantastic venue there. And it was great to see you on the previous panel. And last but not least is Tony Ukachukwu, who's joining us today from Lagos in Nigeria. He's the CEO of Aviators Africa, which is a platform that's celebrating its 10th anniversary. Publishes a wonderful quarterly magazine. The new one's just out, and Zuck's features quite heavily, I believe, in there. So I've had a good read, so that's fantastic. Tony and I also work together on Aviadev and also through our Aviators Africa Academy outreach program, which we've delivered across the continent, engaging many learners, over 1,000 learners. So what I want to do to start the session, before we bring it into the panel, I'm not going to do a presentation, but I'm actually going to run a poll for both the panelists and all of our attendees to vote on. So we're going to launch it right now. And this is anonymous, so we won't be gauging, but we're going to run a poll. So what will the African airline landscape look like post-COVID? So if we're just talking, say, 3 years from now, so this is finger in the air, crystal ball stuff. Are we going to see the airlines, much as before, being state-owned airlines dominating? And we've seen a big increase in that. Are we going to see consolidation? So we're going to see fewer but stronger airlines that are going to be state-owned? Are we going to see a bit more private equity coming in and some more private airlines starting and having some sort of equitable mix between the two? Or are we going to go to the full extreme and the dream of Yamoussoukro and full liberalization and capitalist view of full liberalization with private airlines starting to dominate? So we've got about 25 votes. I want to give everybody another 20 seconds, so please do vote now. I know there's a few options there, but I wanted to do this just to gauge the sentiment of the audience, and obviously it will be a good talking point for the panel themselves. So I'm going to close. We've got nearly 40 votes. So here we go. I'm going to share the results with everybody right now. So you can see that most people are saying there will actually start to be a bit of a swing towards private and state-owned airlines, which is quite interesting. So it's quite an optimistic view. And I like that. Optimism is something that we need more of, both in the world today generally, and especially in African aviation as well, because it's had a tough time. So I want to start by coming to Aaron first of all. So Aaron, you and I have known each other for a long time, and I want to talk to you about this SATAM, the Single African Air Transport Market. Now, it's widely accepted markets are going to open in the order domestic first, then regional, then international. And for me, I want to focus on that middle one, which is the regional connectivity, which is something that we know has lacked in the past in Africa. The SATAM, explain to us what it is, what it sets out to do, but also is now the right time to launch something like SATAM when we're starting basically from a restart phase.
Okay, John, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much to the audience. I'm actually very excited with the outcome of your poll. Very interesting perception in terms of the introduction of private equity into the African aviation spectrum. And that is one of the elements that actually is brought up in the SATAM regulation. So in a nutshell, SATAM stands for the Single African Air Transport Market. And a lot of people say SATAM is new. It's a new concept. It's something that is, let's say, just been introduced to the African environment. Actually, SATAM is not. What SATAM envisages to do is to make sure that the work that has been started with the Yamoussoukro is now finalized. That's what SATAM does. The heads of states came together, the ministers of transport came together and said, there's been quite a lot of talk about the lack of progress of Yamoussoukro. What can we do to make it work? And the realization was that, look, instead of going back to the drawing board and starting something completely new, let us actually embrace the good things that have happened through SATAM. And here, John, I always want to use an acronym of saying, look, there has always been this perception that let's benchmark. So what has happened in Europe, what has happened in the USA, what has happened in Asia, how can we bring the best practice to Africa? And I think the African wisdom here is to say, can we share their failures, what actually did not work for them, and let us make sure that we learn from what did not work in those environments. And I think that is what SATAM has tried to do, to say, okay, we know what has not happened, what has not worked well in the other markets. Can we now make those things work in Africa? So SATAM just simply says, those things that were envisaged in the Yamoussoukro decision, liberalization of the African skies, can we make it happen? There are 8 concrete measures that need to be put in place so that every country that signs its memorandum of understanding, they want to be able to say, we are giving you our commitment, a memorandum of commitment that we are going to be part of the SATAM, part of actualizing the Yamoussoukro decision. So far, the progress that has been made, 34 countries have signed up for SATAM. Of those 34 countries, 18 countries have signed the memorandum of implementation, which is actually a commitment that goes further to say, not only have we signed, but we are now actually focusing on implementation of SATAM. And of those 18 countries, 10 have actually gone to the extent of fully implementing the concrete measures that are required for a country to say, we are now fully compliant with SATAM. So with this progress, 34 countries represents more than 70% of the air traffic in Africa, intra-Africa. This is significant in terms of what, especially when you take into consideration where we are now. And I agree with you, John. I think a lot of people make the mistake of saying, oh, okay, post-COVID-19, we're going back to normal. There is no normal. The reality is that there is going to be a completely new environment that we are going to have to operate in. So I personally agree with you. Phase 1 is where we are trying to get out of. We are not there. We are not out of there completely. Phase 1 was containment, flattening the curve. How do we flatten the curve? And that is what most countries have been focusing on. Phase 2 is coexisting with COVID. We are going to coexist with COVID for a long time to come. Actually, it's going to be downgraded from a pandemic to an endemic. And we're going to live with it just like we live with flu and with malaria and other diseases, or Ebola for that matter. Phase 3 is the aspiration where we want to get to and say, where we've got a vaccine and treatment or treatment. Now, with SATAM being in place, the progress that we've made is going to take us to the level where we're going to start saying, as Africans, how can we start trading with each other? And I always want to say, SATAM cannot be a standalone now that we've got the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. These two have to coexist so that when we start opening up the industries, we have to start opening up with the realization that we are not going back to where we were. We are not even going to see the levels that we were anticipating in 2019. We're going to have to see new levels. What are those new levels that we are going to see? We are the ones who are going to have to be the architects of what we are going to see. Let me stop there and give others a chance as we proceed, John.
No, I really appreciate that, Aaron, and I've got a few more questions for you on this, but we'll come back. We're going to jump around a little bit, and I want to, I totally agree with you. I think, all of this is in harmony. We talk about collaboration, we always talk about it, and it is the only way to make things work. And we talk about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the expectation of the visa, a uni visa for the whole of Africa. Obviously, that's being done on a regional basis at the moment. So my big thing here is now is the time, or is now the time, because we're starting again. We've got that opportunity to take a deep breath and say, let's look at what we were doing. How can we now do it differently? But we are operating in that with COVID era right now, and that's why I want to come to you, Zux, for some comment in terms of, from your members' side, what are some of the measures that your members are having to take from a sanitation perspective, and also to try and inspire this traveler confidence? Because as I alluded to at the beginning, you can have all the capacity and all the seats available on the aircraft, but if there's only 2 people on each plane, it's just not, it's not viable from an economic standpoint. So there's 2 things there. What are they actually doing sanitation wise, and how are they trying to encourage and stimulate that demand?
Good morning, good afternoon, John, and everybody on the panel, fellow panelists, and everybody who's joined us. As a Basa CEO, we have airline members that are really ready to get on and fly. But obviously, we are not ignorant of the fact that we need to convince our customers and we need to convince the government that we have protocols in place that will actually curb the spread of the virus. So as you know, airlines, we've dealt with communicable diseases as they are part of us. I think Aaron has already mentioned, we've dealt with AIDS, we've dealt with H1N1 swine flu, we've dealt with Ebola, we've dealt with lots of viruses. So basically, we already have protocols in place to deal with this. But however, we know this is a novel one. This has just spread rapidly. It has affected aviation. It has affected the whole world because we're at the standstill now. Obviously, now we need to convince everybody that you want that air travel is a safe mode of transport to be able to come back and resume operation. So we take our cue from World Health Organization, as well as ICAO, which is our International Civil Aviation Authority, as well as the IATA, whereby they give us, that this is the way recommendation on how to deal with it. So that's what we are doing. Currently, as airlines were seized, basically, with lots of information that come from all these bodies, is to ensure that we sanitize, we do the rest of the things to make the customers comfortable. Now, from South Africa, what we've done, the Civil Aviation Authority, that is our director, she called all the captains of the industry. We started looking at what is it that we're going to do in order to make the customer aware and tell them that we are putting measures in place and we're ready, South Africa is ready to travel. So what we've done, our processes, our protocols, most of them about cleaning and disinfection procedures that are more in excess than we've put in the past to deal with the current pandemic, of course. So what are we doing with our protocols? We look at the customer journey as it is. So from you even come to the airport, and you come to the airport, we worry about what have you done or what has happened to you prior to you entering the airport. So fortunately in South Africa, everybody needs to wear a mask. So that's not enough. So when you get into the airport, we need to pre-screen you. When you pre-screen you, we only allow the passengers, the traveling passengers, unless you are dealing with, we're accompanying a person with reduced mobility. So the pre-screening starts at the airport. And then before you even get into the counters, you already have your mask as regulated by the government. Then we pre-screen you, we do the social distances. When you deal with our check-in agents, they are wholly kitted such that there is no interaction that will transmit the diseases. So from there, in all your journey as you go through the airport building until you get to the aircraft, there is sanitization that is different from what we've done in the past, because right now it has to be approved by the Civil Aviation Authority, and they don't only approve, they come and be watchdog to see if we're following our processes. By the time you go through security, there's a double sanitization, and when you go onto the aircraft again, we've got processes that we deal with it. On the aircraft, the cabin crew must ensure that from when you board into the aircraft themselves, they undergo training to ensure that they understand how to deal with each and every. In fact, they treat everybody as if the person that they are meeting is asymptomatic or has got a symptom. So they are kitted to make sure that they're not affected themselves. So when you get on board, of course, they'll do the formalities of meeting and greeting you, but they have to keep a safe distance. They are kitted and you have your mask, and the seats on board, our sitting has been a recommendation from the bodies that I've mentioned before, that the sitting, everybody must be forward sitting so that there's no lateral transmission. And the aircraft themselves, we rely on what you call the HEPA. And I'm sure everybody knows now about the HEPA, where the high efficiency speculate accurate, because what happens in that one, it is said that the transmission on itself, it's almost zero between when based on the new aircraft that are installed with the HEPA. So everybody is conscientized, from the cleaning staff, from the crew members, the pilots, and everybody that is on board, even the passengers, before we give them as much as information. Because right now in South Africa, we're on level 3, and level 3 allows for business travel. But we treat the business travel because we're using it as a way to it's like we're looking at it and say, okay, if our protocols are working in the business travel, then we can be able to open for travel because our protocols are in place and are doing well. Now, we as I said, that after on board, we sit in such that way. In fact, you know, for instance, some aircrafts allow for people to sit and look at each other. It's not allowed under South African laws. That everybody needs the backrest in order to make sure that we don't allow for transmission. Now we've got processes for special needs passengers, because we do understand that people will travel, and we have protocols for all of that. And on board, the catering is reduced. Everything is sealed, the utensils, so that there's minimum interaction between the cabin crew and the customers. So as you get on board, don't think that crew are aloof. It's because we need to look after you and look after ourselves. And there's a process for trash collection on board, because everybody needs to ensure that there's minimum, as I say, the whole thing is about social distancing, even on the aircraft. So everything, you know, has changed basically. Our SOPs are different from what we used to see. So don't think that people are aloof. It's just we have to ensure that in between we are sterilizing it. Even the headrest on the aircraft, we don't use the headrest like that they need to be changed basically. We use headrest that from each, if we have a turnaround, for each and every turnaround, you need to change it and use new ones. And you need to clean thoroughly, you know, you sanitize your chairs, the backrest, the seat belts, you know, everything that could have a human touch needs to be re-sanitized. So obviously turnarounds are no longer gonna be the 30 minutes turnarounds, and are things of the past, until we are certain that, you know, everybody understands and everybody has bought into it and understand that the delays that we'll be incurring are delays that are meant to protect you as a traveling customer. So there's a lot that we're doing in place from the airline side, and we're working with our airline members, and they understand that things will never be the same, but all is done to ensure that we disinfect the aircraft. And when we finish for the end of the day, we disinfect. At the end of 24 hours, there's a disinfection that will happen, so that when you resume operations in the morning, the aircraft has been thoroughly cleaned by the maintenance staff, and they're using the sanitization that is approved by the World Health Organization, as well as the local health department of South Africa. So those are all the things that we're looking at, John.
No, that's fantastic. Really, really thorough. And I'm going to come back to you on this, but just a real quick answer on this. And this would be the question I'm sure a lot of our travelers who aren't necessarily aviation people or elsewhere, you know, we're talking about reduced turnarounds, reduced load factors. Who's going to pay for this? The passenger is going to be paying a higher price, no, over time or immediately?
Okay. No, not really. When we're talking about the reduced turnaround, no passenger can incur that cost. And again, I know that some people are talking about the middle seat that is going to be reserved. It's not going to happen in South Africa. What has happened that the processes or the protocols that are in place right now, the government or the Department of Transport has approved them, that using our HEPA system, using our seats facing forward, and everybody wearing a mask and disinfecting the seats in between the flight, and the crew having to watch, ensure that there's limited movements in the aircraft. It all has convinced our government that you are good to go. But as I say, we're busy stress testing what you've put in place to ensure that you know, nobody incurs. We are very much keenly aware that paying passenger shouldn't pay for the shouldn't take the tab for that. All these procedures needs to safeguard our staff, the paying passengers, and ensure that we can open for the for all the types of traveling and not confine ourselves to business travel.
Okay, great. I mean, I've heard of I was on a webinar the other day. I've heard of hotels implementing sanitation taxes and things like that, because they're obviously having to incur extra costs to do extra cleaning between the rooms. And the one thing I would say on this is, first thing, on the HEPA thing, on the circulation of the air, I'm seeing a lot of education coming from the OEMs, from the manufacturers. So Embraer's CEO has put out some stuff, and Airbus as well, just trying to build that confidence about saying, look, if you come on our planes, we have this system, and it's much more, the air is recirculated, not at all, you know, it's filtered all the time, and you're much less likely to, you know, to catch something here than you are in an office or even in a hospital. And I think the other thing to say on this is, you know, we had a reset in our industry when we had the terrorist attacks in 9/11. They obviously used an aircraft, and therefore we had to then change the way we did security. It used to be like getting a bus in the US, and it changed, and we survived and we carried on growing. This is like another thing that we've been hit with, but you know, we have to find a way to make it work, and we did before. I'm confident we will again. So I'm going to come back to you, but I'm going to go over to Paul now, because Paul and I know each other well, and you know, Cape Town Air Access have delivered a really world-class approach to route development, and it's not just me saying that, it's the results of that as well, what Cape Town have actually been able to deliver in terms of bringing in all these new airlines. Now, obviously, the challenge is, are they all going to come back post-COVID? That's your job, Paul. I'm sure it keeps you up at night with all that work that you've done. But I want to talk to you more about the approach of route development from destinations. Tell us about what Cape Town have done, and do you think we'll see more destinations and more airport authorities creating a more collaborative approach to route development?
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Today it's like a day in Manchester in November in Cape Town, so you would feel at home here.
Yeah, I heard that. It's all right.
So at least we have a lot of water, so hopefully we don't have that issue anymore. So we can tick that off. With regards to your question, indeed, of course, the world is changing, and in the last few years, the last 5 years, we had that collaborative approach here in Cape Town, which received lots of results, lots of more passengers to Cape Town, especially on the international side. But of course, that's going to change. If we look at the beginning of this year, January, February were very good months for Cape Town. International growth of 4% and 7%, so very satisfying. A lot of airlines already planning for next year, especially because Cape Town is a seasonal destination that is changing as well. But of course, still the IATA winter is our most important season, which is October till April. So of course, the first weeks you're thinking what's going to happen, but then soon we start to think like we have to prepare a recovery plan, and we can't do that alone. We have to do that with all the stakeholders involved. And I think that's one of the strengths that we had in Cape Town. That Cape Town Air Access is a collaboration, not only airports company, but also the city, provincial government, as well as the National Tourism Board, South African Tourism, Cape Town Tourism, and the private sector are involved. And together we are approaching and involve them in a recovery plan. And I think if you look at the future, you need to have that collaborative approach. And I think that's what's going to change in the industry, especially route development. Often that's been done by an airport in discussions with an airline, but I don't think that's possible anymore, because you need to have that solution. The airline needs to have the confidence indeed in the destination. So I expect that more collaboration will take place in the near future, and that more regions and countries will look at different models that they have to involve governments into their approach towards the airlines. And because of course that will change as well. There will be a lot of consolidation in the industry. Less aircraft will be available, less frequencies will be flown. So those things we have to address. And that's why we are already in discussions with the carriers, with our recovery plans, and also to show them what we can do to the airlines. So together with all the stakeholders involved, we try to de-risk the destination and to show them what we do, and also together with AXA indeed work on the protocols they have in place. But those protocols also need to be marketed. And I think that's an important thing as well for other regions, for other countries, that airlines and airports and the whole destinations here in Africa is showing what's being done to de-risk travel. And I think that's a very important issue. And of course, the travel patterns will change as well. We see that already happening here in South Africa. As was mentioned, since last week, we're on level 3. So indeed, domestic travel is allowed again. So last Monday, Airlink, for example, a regional carrier, they never flew the Cape Town Johannesburg leg, but they started doing that. So you will see also patterns that airlines will change and operate different routes. Another example is all the other aircraft will be phased out. Example is, for example, Delta. They currently fly a 777-200, extra long range, direct Atlanta, Johannesburg, Johannesburg, Atlanta. But that aircraft will be phased out. So they will put in the latest aircraft, the 350. The 350 can't do Johannesburg, Atlanta. So they have to relook at the routing. So what they will probably do is Atlanta, Johannesburg, Johannesburg, Cape Town, Atlanta. So you'll see the impact already of the COVID-19 in the industry is quite immense. And of course, that has a big impact on the route development and how we approach. So how we always did our bids towards the airlines, of course, was always based on data. So we used data sources like OEG, very useful, but historic data will be totally different, of course, will be useless. But we also always included the marketing from the destination, the trade flows, the investment flows. And I think part of the business case will now be also indeed what we mentioned. What's the situation with regards to the healthcare? What are the protocols in place? And indeed, is it a safe destination to go to? So what we will do also in the future, if we look at destinations, we want to know exactly from their side what's happening as well as here in Cape Town. So we can de-risk the route. And I think that's also an important tool towards an airline to bring them back, because we have to show them the confidence in the route. So those are the things that we see and we're currently working on. So on the recovery plan, we have our own, but we also together with SUX, for example, in the industry, we're working on the lobby document, a recovery plan for South Africa as a whole. And I think that's very important also if we look at the African market. What can we do to de-risk the African market? So yeah. That's my first remarks, John.
No, fantastic. And I know we're going to hear from Dion. He's actually just joined us on the, you're on the next panel, Dion. You have to wait a minute. He was just checking his video, I'm sure. So we'll hear from him on the next panel about some of these you know, what's being put into place and how that's obviously being communicated as well. And I think the point I get from you is that you're going to have to work harder now. You're going to have to work more collaboratively, because you're going to have to work harder to attract the airlines, because they're the ones who are going to say, right, you know, this is what happened in Europe, is when we liberalized, they have the power to go where they want, and they do hold airports and destinations to ransom. Whereas, you know, obviously my experience from doing Aviadev for the last 5 years, that is what we're all about, is obviously route development, is that we still need that that ability to build that collaborative approach like the Air Access team has in Cape Town. And what we've done for the last couple of years is we've put on some training at the event. We also make it free for tourist boards to come if their airport is coming. Just educate people, because, you know, I'll have conversations about route development with an island destination CEO and say, how many of your tourist arrivals arrive by air? Oh, 85%. Okay, right. So how much communication do you have with those airlines? They're your biggest customer. Oh, no, that's the airport's job. And you say, well, no way. Like, you should be saying to the airport, how can I help you continue to keep that, consolidate that route, and also develop it and build that relationship, which is obviously what you've done. So we'll come back to you shortly, but I want to bring in Tony. Thanks for waiting, Tony, first of all. And I want to kind of bring you in more on the you know, you're obviously there in Lagos, and I want to see whether, you know, what your thoughts are on sort of business models, and that question that we asked at the beginning about, is there going to be more private equity into airports and into airlines as a result of this? Are people going to see this as an opportunity, or are we going to go back to kind of, it's going to be state-owned enterprises, money being poured in by the taxpayer without necessarily the return on investment?
Thank you, John. I want to welcome all the panelists and all those participating in this workshop. So basically, here in West Africa, totally, we all know, the sector has to go on the reset. We can't go back to the way we were doing things before. I hear a lot of people say we need to go, to a recovery phase. But I just say that I don't think we should be talking about recovery. We should be talking about reinvention, because going back to the recovery phase actually means that we are going back to a time where the airlines, as a whole, we're not even making money. We're not healthy. So we shouldn't be talking about recovery, but rather we should be talking about reinvention. Airlines were not really healthy from the south to the west, from the east to the north as well. So basically, there should be a reset. There should be a whole change of policy and the way things are being done in the sector. And coming to the audit side, I think the airlines and government-owned airlines and private-owned airlines are kind of slow in the way they are doing audits at this time. Most people are calling for bailouts, but I think there should be a proper audit before bailouts should be handed out, because case in point is not a lot of bailouts have been given to African airlines, be it government-owned or private-owned airlines. Back in 2012 in Nigeria, airlines were given bailouts, but what happened afterwards was that the bailout didn't stop the airlines. A lot of airlines that got bailouts still went down under. This is where it brings me to corporate governance. A lot of airlines in Africa don't have corporate governance. They usually have this one man, running the whole show, which is why there's no proper accountability. So you get bailouts, they divert funds or do it for whatever reason and not put it to use for the airline's sake, and you see airlines still going down. So I think post-COVID-19, we should be talking about recovery. I mean, we should be talking about recovery, but rather reinvention, a reset, a new way of doing things, changing the whole entire policy and the whole paradigm shift on the way airlines are being run. That way, we can now begin to look at a new normal, which the COVID-19 has hit, whether we like it or not. So basically, I think the audit should happen more and be more transparent, rather than people just asking for bailout. There should be a thorough audit of the whole process to know how healthy airlines are, to know how, if airlines are given, how they are going to be handled. Then make sure that there's corporate governance in place. My personal opinion, I always said it, if there's no corporate governance for any airline, no airline should get a bailout, because this is time for accountability. This is a new normal, if you would say, not how things are done before. So going forward, there should be a total reset of how things are done in the aviation industry, and before bailout of any kind are given, there should be a proper audit.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a very emotive subject, talking about state-owned airlines, and I suppose the question there is, obviously African airlines overall have been losing money in a pretty good market, pre-COVID, when other parts of the world were making money cumulatively. You had Ethiopian Airlines, but most of the other airlines were obviously losing money. So it's very difficult to go into a crisis when you're already struggling, and then you're obviously going to have to ask for more, and what is the recovery plan? But it's a very emotive subject, because obviously if that airline, whichever country it is, if that airline is removed, who's going to take its place if it's not necessarily a profit-making enterprise, and how are you connected to the world in the interim? So there's a lot at play when it comes to this. I want to come back to you, Aaron, and I want to come back to you on 2 points, actually. The first one is, SATAM, one of the things, I was there for the signing in January 2018. I went to Addis, to the African Union, to see it signed, and we're now in June 2020, so we're 2.5 years on. You gave us the numbers in terms of signed memorandum of implementation into implementation, but is one of the issues here a lack of punitive measures? If people don't implement, that there isn't actually any power with those bodies to say, I'm sorry, you can't do that, you have to do it, or else we'll put in you know, whatever punitive power they can. And the second question, which is slightly different, but I'm conscious of the amount of time we got, so I want to get your feel on this as well, is one concern of liberalization that Africa's strongest airline, Ethiopian, becomes a monopoly? You know, it's already doing a lot of strategic investment. And is that necessarily a bad thing if you've got an airline that has shown it can make money and run a good operation? So your thoughts on those couple of points?
Thank you very much, John. So let me take you back to the SATAM issue. When SATAM was put together, it took into consideration the progress that had been made through the Yamoussoukro decision. And the things that you're talking about, for example, punitive measures for non-compliance, they are already encapsulated in the Yamoussoukro decision via the dispute resolution mechanism. So what SATAM said was, look, the dispute resolution mechanisms are not complete. Let us complete them. So right now, as we speak, even during the COVID, the powers that be, the monitoring body and executing agency of SATAM are working effectively to make sure that the resolution mechanisms are put in place. And the resolution mechanisms address things like, for example, from airline to authorities. If an airline feels that they have not been treated well in accordance with the Yamoussoukro decision, which is the ultimate goal of liberalization of the African space to African airlines, which means any African airline can fly anywhere they want to fly to, as long as they are a signatory of SATAM and they are an African airline. So if that airline feels that they've applied for traffic rights to a particular destination and the authorities have not given them the slots or even granted the traffic rights for whatever reason, they can actually invoke the dispute resolution mechanism to resolve that particular issue. Number one. Number two, the mechanism itself also addresses things like consumer protectionism. If a consumer or if a group of consumers feel that they are not being treated fairly, either through being overcharged or lack of facilities or whatever, or the policies in their respective jurisdiction or government are restricting the development of air traffic, they can actually approach the executing agency and the monitoring body, which is under the auspices of the African Union and the European Commission for Africa. They can actually approach them and say, this is the challenge that we have as consumers. So you can see that there is a lot of focus on making sure that the dispute resolution mechanisms are put in place. So the second part of your question is very interesting, John. When you talk about monopoly and ET, I personally don't believe that Ethiopian Airlines are going to end up being a monopoly. What they've done is they've been able to execute their business plan. Now, a lot of things have been said about African airlines not being profitable and so forth. I think the COVID-19, in my view, is a typical or a very good example, is a blessing in disguise for all of us to focus on this. When we talk about airlines being productive or being profitable, it's one thing to realize that when an airline generates revenue, that's just vanity. Revenue or sales is vanity. It gives you it's a good feel. You feel good that you've been able to generate revenue. But if you are a business person, you ask, and then what? So revenue is vanity. Profit gives you a sense of sanity. To an extent, you begin to understand which direction you are going, but it doesn't give you the fighting chance that you need as an airline. And in airline parlance, I can tell you, John, cash flow is reality. Right now, even IATA has been talking about it from a global perspective. When we bring it closer to home in Africa, as far back as March this year, 2020, there's been talk that most African airlines only had cash enough to sustain themselves for 2 months. Those 2 months are over. So we ask ourselves this question, so what's going to happen now? Because it's now 2 months that their cash is now run out. They have not been generating any revenue, and so they can't declare any profit. Cash flow, the king, is negative. So what's going to happen to those airlines? So even with Ethiopian Airlines being the biggest and having been profitable, the question they also have to ask themselves is, do they have enough cash flow to be able to sustain their business and even to develop other relationships with other airlines? If Ethiopian Airlines wanted to go and develop a relationship with another airline anywhere on the African continent, of course, they've got the manpower, they've got the experience, the expertise, they might even have the aircraft that they might be able to use in that venture. But the key in this whole relationship is cash flow. Do they have the cash to be able to go and start that business? So in my view, I think what needs to happen, and this is where it addresses, especially SATAM addresses the issue of policy changes. We need to do maybe 3 or 4 things, but let me quickly just summarize this and say, as African Airlines, from that perspective of wanting to say we need to have our own airline, that thinking has to be debunked and make sure that we understand that not every country must have an airline. As difficult as it is for countries to say that, that's the reality. If you look at the USA, how many of the 50 states in the USA each have has an airline? If you look at Europe, how many of each of those European countries each has an airline? If you look at Asia, how many of those Asian countries each has an airline? Come back to Africa, we must be able to start saying to ourselves, is having an airline a priority? So we must move from the perception that we have to save the African airlines, the blanket approach. In my view, that is the wrong thing to do. The right thing is to do is to give targeted support to specific airlines. A specific airline must come with a specific business plan. I don't want to talk about the recovery plan because you're going to recover yourself into debt. You have to have a business plan that takes you to the future. So you must be able to say, we are targeting this particular airline, support requirement is to be able to do 1, 2, 3. The second thing is we must also help the workforce to transit them from where they were before COVID-19. They are not going to go back there. There are new jobs now. Zooks was talking about the protocols on board the aircraft. Those cabin crew have to be trained in doing new things. So we have to be able to help the workforce to transit to new jobs. And the last thing is we need to have a rapid and solid restructuring of businesses. Those businesses cannot survive with the current business plans that they have. If they're going to go back to the same good old tried and failed ways of doing business, they're not going to survive. And now, this is where the question of Ethiopian Airlines comes in. Are you going to begrudge Ethiopian Airlines for continuing to grow when they do things that are different and that give them the advantage of having a positive cash flow? The answer, in my view, is no. We must be able to support them.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think, what was it? Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash flow is reality, something like that. It's brilliant.
That's correct.
And I totally agree. Like we said, like Paul and I were talking about before, with the data, if you say, oh, this month last year, it's not relevant anymore. In the same way that this was our business plan before, it's about growth, not recovery. I like that point as well. So I want to come back to you, Zooks, because we've had a question from Alistair on the Q&A. Alistair Stead. He's asking us about the quarantine, and we've just brought this in on Monday here in the UK. Only 3.5 months late, but now everybody has to quarantine for 14 days, and basically, you can probably guess my opinion on that and what that's doing to the industry. But we talked about some of the sanitation measures in terms of the passenger journey, but also those measures like I'm talking about quarantine and what that would do. Which elements do you think are going to be here to stay, and what do you think will just be here for a short period? Because that will obviously, the amount of investment an airline or an airport is going to make, they're not going to change this terminal design if in 6 months we'll be back to normal. So what do you think?
So I'm thinking it's within the DNA really of airlines to focus on health and the safety of our passengers and themselves. So the continual training of communicable diseases will stay. Now, we spoke of the HEPA in the new aircrafts. So I'm thinking that the regulators, we insist that all aircraft must be fixed with the HEPA system. So I think those are gonna stay. Then what's going to move, what's gonna die out is currently we leave something like 3, depending on the aircraft type, 3 rows of seats at the back of the aircraft for a passenger that looks like that is unwell, so that it's managed by cabin crew there. I think that will already go away, because what's going to happen is, as we get better, as we know more about what is happening, so we change our processes, we revisit our processes and look at what is relevant, and as long as the protocols are still making us to make sure that our customers feel safe and are feeling comfortable, then we get rid of really the extra layers that we've put in place to ensure safety of everybody else that is interact with.
No, great. Okay, and a very pragmatic approach, which is the best thing to do at this time of uncertainty. You need to move as things move on. So, Paul, I want to come back to you just to pick up on the route development questions. And one of the things that's very commonplace in terms of trying to increase the airlift to a destination is that there is a program of incentives. Do you see this coming in? So, there's no landing fees for a period of time, or there's some marketing funding to support the route, whatever that may be. This is very commonplace in Europe, in Asia, in the US, and has created this competitive environment. But obviously it comes at a cost, and at a cost to an airport or a destination that obviously doesn't have an income right now. How can you see that growing? And would it just take a very brave destination to do that, or are they going to revert to kind of, well, we need to collect every penny we can, and how do you see that kind of working?
Thanks, John. I think the best incentive that we can give is give security to the airlines when they can start flying again to the destination, and I think that counts for many destinations around the globe. But indeed, if you look at the incentives and packages, we have the private sector is actively involved in our cooperation. So during the past few years, we were able to give marketing support to airlines whenever they started a new route. Obviously, AXA here in South Africa was not allowed to do so because it was regulated. So they couldn't give airlines a waiving of landing fees. But indeed, as you mentioned, around the globe, it's common practice to do so, to give a waiving of landing fees for 1 or at least 2 years for the first 2 years of operation. But from our side, our focus will be and will stay on marketing the route. And indeed, what we mentioned before, as part of the business case, we have to prove that the destination is de-risked and is ready to travel. And I think that's going to be the most important in the next few months, to cooperate and work with the airlines. I know other destinations will probably do it differently. They're probably, like they did before, they will offer incentives, because the fight for airlines and routes, like you mentioned as well, will become more intense. But we will stick to giving the right information to the carriers and assist them with marketing the route, with marketing the region and marketing the country. And I think that's the strength of South Africa and the strength of Cape Town. So collaboration is the key word with regards to giving the best information towards the airlines and the carriers, why they should be flying to South Africa or Cape Town for that matter. And that's what we're going to work on and further improve it in the next few months.
No, amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, and I want to, I'm very conscious of time, but I want to come back to you, Tony. So I just want to ask you, Tony, we've had a couple of questions on this on the chat and the Q&A as well, which is the cost of air travel in a COVID, during or post-COVID era. Is one of the risks of the impact of this that air transport in Africa, which is traditionally has been seen as a preserve of the rich, it's not in Europe and the US, it's developed over time, but we don't have low-cost carriers because we don't have low cost of operation. Jet fuel's expensive, charges, taxes are high. It's very hard for an airline to make that work. So, is this a risk? We've got social distancing to consider. That is obviously affecting load factors. So how do you see the cost of air travel and the availability to the average person? Is it going to, I think it will take time to recover, but will it ever get back to where it was?
Hello?
Hi, Tony. Did you hear me?
Just come again. I didn't hear the last part.
Okay, yeah, it was just, what do you think the impact of this will be on the cost long term for the traveller? Is it going to be more of a preserve just for the rich air travel?
Okay, so right now it's difficult to say because the industry is not on a same page as regards to social distancing in the aircraft. Some are saying leave the middle seats open, and some are saying, you know, we have all the safety protocols in place, we don't need to leave it open. We all know that the airlines have made at least 75% capacity to be able to, you know, be sustainable. So if you leave the middle seats empty, then it's going to be hard for airlines to sustain themselves. So if you have to do that, that means the airlines for sustainability sake, the airlines have to ramp up, you know, the cost of fare. Back here in Nigeria, we haven't started flights yet from the 21st of June, but this is the conversation that's still ongoing as to what regulators will tell the airlines to do at the moment. It's not quite clear, but trust me, I mean, Luke has already unpacked it with how, with the HEPA filters, with the most of the aircraft that fly these days, we don't have to implement the leaving the middle seats open. And IATA has also been pushing on that we don't have to leave the middle seats open so that the airlines is sustainable. So if the middle seats, leaving the middle seats have to be implemented, then definitely for the airlines to save staff, the fees have to be ramped up. But if it's going to, if we're going to see airlines taking all the safety protocols and still having the state configuration the way they are, then I think the fees will be manageable, and, you know, the passengers will be able to afford the fees going forward. However, I don't know where the bulk of the safety protocols are going to be passed on to. Will the airlines take like the masks and the PPEs and whatever have you? Will the airlines take the cost of them, or will they pass it to passengers? That is left to be seen. But I think in some areas, airlines are taking care of those costs. Some are trying to pass it on to the passengers. So, but in the near future, we'll get to know which will be which. But however, I think going forward, most airlines will now come to realize that it's okay to not leave the seats empty for airlines to be sustainable and prosperous.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I think we all managed to get that. The connection's not brilliant, but I want to thank all my panelists because I'm very conscious of time, and the themes that we wanted to talk about were how to inspire traveller confidence. We've got some ideas there. Zook took us very clearly through the process of how the airport and airline experience, and how obviously that was very clear then that you're working together with Poppy at the CAA there. You're obviously meeting and you're talking about the process, the protocols, taking a very a very serious approach to this to build that confidence by showing them these are the steps and then educating and marketing those. Is now the right time for African aviation liberalisation? Aaron obviously covered that very nicely, and let's hope so that we build this. And off the back of that, how is the approach to attracting airlines? So all of those airports and tourism authorities that are listening today, if you're an airport, start talking to your tourism authority, and if you're a tourism authority, start asking your airport how you can support, because you are, whoever you are, wherever you are in Africa, air travel will recover, it will return, and you're going to need your airline partners to bring your tourists into the destination in time. And we're talking domestic, we're talking regional, but I don't think anybody believes that's a long-term play. That's just what we're able to do because of the legislation. And the final question, when will traffic recover to 2019 levels, and how are we going to get there? That's the big $64 million question, really. I won't put the panel on the spot for their predictions because it will only come back to haunt you, so don't worry, I won't do that. But I want to say thank you to all of you for taking the time, giving us, you can reach out to all of us on LinkedIn, and if you do want to carry on the conversation, we're actually hosting an event called Africa Tomorrow on the 21st of July. It's free for all Africans to attend. It will focus on aviation, tourism and hospitality. We'll have all the industry leaders there. Thank you, Tess. Thank you for the opportunity, and back over to you, I think. Tess, you're still muted.
Right. Okay, there we go. Thank you, John. Well, thank you to John and the panel for a very interesting discussion. I think for many of us who don't really understand how airlines work, it was very insightful and informative. So yes, it's not just snap the fingers and the airplanes take off again. There are so many aspects involved. And we look forward to further development on this topic, and certainly hope that the skies will open earlier than what is currently predicted.